Pablo Picasso was born to Donna Maria Picasso y Lopez and Don Jose Ruiz Blasco on October 25, 1881 in Malaga, Spain. Pablo Picasso's father was an art teacher and had a great influence on Pablo Picasso as an artist and in his education while he was a younger boy. As an artist, Pablo Picasso's father was able to paint animals, but this was not a very popular genre of his time. The most popular genre of his father's time were pieces of history. So this discussion will explain the history and evolution of Pablo Picasso's art through the periods in which he painted and lived. So Pablo had two sisters. One of them passed away when she was only 4 years old. His early experiences with death from his sister and best friend, later on we'll talk about him, left him in an emotional state that would later influence one of the stages of his paintings known as the blue phase, or blue period. When Pablo Picasso was just 8 years old, that is the age he began to paint. In 1996 and 1997, his first major pieces of artwork were completed. They were entitled The First Communion and Science and Charity. During this time, he also included a good but simple painting of his father. Many artists of his time were very hard at criticizing his work, and the way they explained his art was that it lacked inspiration. So during his first paintings, he signed his name as his actual last name, which was Ruiz, but later on he took on his mother's last name, which was Picasso. In the early 1900s, Pablo got his first studio from Montmartre in Paris. He shared this studio with a friend. This is the friend that I had mentioned earlier. He met this friend in Barcelona when he was studying in Barcelona. He started to experiment with a blurring technique. And through this blurring technique, it gave his paintings an illusion of movement. During this time in his life, Pablo also began to develop a fascination with the nightlife in Paris. So a lot of this fascination is depicted in his early pieces of art. From 1891 to 1901, this is known as the Young Picasso period. From 1901 to 1904, this is known as the Blue period. As stated earlier, this is a more depressive mood in his career, and this is related to the deaths of his partner and friend and sister. Due to his mood during this period, not very many buyers were interested in his work. He used a lot of depressing colors, blues, grays. They just portrayed a very dark feeling. After the Blue period, Pablo moved into what is known as the Rose period, and this lasted from 1904 to 1906. He used more beige and pink colors. His paintings began to lighten up. One famous painting is The Girl in Chimes. This is more of a transition phase. There are some blue colors, but more lighter colors, rose and beige. From 1906 to 1902, this is known as the Black Period, Pablo began to experiment drastically in this period. He began to show himself as a more abstract and structural artist. He felt he was meant to be. After studying some African art and artifacts, he was greatly influenced. He later denied that the African art had any type of influence in his work, but this was due for political reasons only. During the Black Period, it is said that this was a reaction to the mainstream art trade. He made enough money from the Rose Period for any financial circumstances that he may have circumstanced. During the Rose Period, or during the Black Period, during the Rose Period, even though he made enough money to be self-sufficient, he did not feel that the work he completed in the Rose Period described him as an artist, so he was not fulfilled as an artist. So that's why he went into the Black Period and began to experiment structurally and more abstract, per se. During this period, he was more creative, which led him to the Cubism period, which lasted from 1907 to 1915. And to me, this is the period that most defines Picasso. It's the more the period that defines him. So Cubism is defined as a representation of three dimensions from several viewpoints. At one point, Cubism historians gave founding credit to Picasso, and Picasso only, but this is untrue. He actually was influenced by another artist. I believe his name was George Braque. This artist that Picasso worked closely with during this period, from 1907 to 1911, he was able to practice analytical cubism and then also synthetic cubism. In both styles, a subject would be reconstructed in intersecting, sometimes transparent planes. One of his famous paintings during this period is entitled Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. And I know I probably pronounced that closely, but not properly. And then his final stage of work is entitled the Late Work Period. And it lasted from 1965 to 1972. During this period, he was able to produce the most artwork he did in any other period. So some critics believe that he was creatively lazy, and then other artists say that he may have completed the most finest pieces of work in this era. During this time period, Pablo completed his final self-portrait, which I feel that if you look at his first self-portrait and then look at his last self-portrait, you will see a boy who became the artist later on that he was always meant to be. Which I do not have an example. I do have examples of some of his paintings, but I do not have the example of the first portrait along with the final portrait. I do remember studying both portraits, and the final portrait was more of the structural experimentation, while the first portrait was more of the everyday expected painting anyone would expect an artist to paint, just almost like a photograph, which I do have that as an example to show you. As for Pablo's love life. He ended up marrying a couple, 2 or 3 different women. He had a string of women, numerous affairs, numerous children. One of the women that he married was his first wife, Olga. She was a Russian ballerina dancer. They married in 1918. They separated. They never actually divorced until later on. And they had a son named Paulo. This son actually passed in 1975. He later married a woman by the name of Jacqueline. He was able to convince this lady to divorce the current husband that she had so that she can marry him. And then he was able to marry another woman named Maria Teresa. No, Maria Teresa always hoped that Picasso would marry her, but he never did. And so this devastated her so that she was able to soon commit suicide after Pablo's death. So, in conclusion, Picasso is one of the first artists to make over $1 billion while he was still alive. Pablo Picasso remains a legend today, and he is studied as one of the best, if not the best, artists of all time. So he truly deserves to be honored in the world of art.